Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the Embassy Suites Hotel, Syracuse, New York. It is the 1st of May, 2007, approximately 2:30 p.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Daniel J. Mackessy, February the 26th, 1924, Chicago, Illinois.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
I had 8 years of grammar school, 4 years of high school, and I had a 5-year scholarship sponsored by General Motors, and I had just started college, and I had about 6 months into it. And I quit college and volunteered in service.
Okay. Before we get to that, do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, I was in the high school auditorium. It was a study class. I was in there studying, and all of a sudden the news came over the loudspeaker when President Roosevelt declared war on Japan.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What was your reaction? Did you have any personal reaction to that at all? Do you recall? Or?
Well, when you're young like that and brought up in an Irish neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, it sounded like a fight to me, and that was great.
Now you enlisted in the Navy. Why did you pick the Navy?
Oh, first I picked the Naval Air Corps, and I went down there and enlisted, and they told, okay, we're back home, we'll call you when we're ready. Well, there was another buddy of mine, Francis X. Bushman, named after the movie actor. He went down there with me, and we both enlisted in the Naval Air Corps. We're going to be pilots, you know. And they send you home until they get opening for the next group that's going through training. So we were home about 2 or 3 weeks, and we're getting edgy, and so we said, let's go down and tell that guy off. So we went down Chicago, down to the Loop, and the recruiting station, and we went in there to really give him a piece of our mind, and we started going after him. He says, look, I can get you to go right away if you want. We said, well, do it. So he did. He signed us up for the straight Navy. We didn't know about it. And I got on the train thinking I was going down to Glenview, Illinois, for, up in the North Shore for the Naval Station for the flight training. And I wound up at Great Lakes. And I was in the regular Navy. And when I got there, I was assigned to go through boot camp, like a regular, what we call SWABI, third class seaman. And when we went for our swimming test, everybody is supposed to know how to swim in the Navy. I swam, and they pulled me aside, and they said, did you ever swim in a team or anything? And I said, yeah. I said, I was a lifeguard, and I had a lifeguard certificate from the Red Cross, work as a lifeguard. So they pulled me out and put me as a swimming instructor in Great Lakes. So I stayed there for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then I guess they looked at the records or something. They pulled me out of there and sent me down to Urbana, Illinois for 4 weeks of diesel engineering school at the University of Illinois. After that, 4 weeks, they sent me to Chicago, what we call a chit, which was just a pass to get on a train, and all our traveling then was done by train. There was no flying, and I didn't get into. I would thought they were going to transfer me to the Navy training for the pilot training, but they didn't. I had to wait until I got out of service to get my pilot's license on my own. So I was at the Union Station in Chicago. They made the train up of Army, Navy, everybody got on this one train. And there was one fellow assigned to each coach. And I was the lucky guy to get in charge of one coach with all these different Marines and Army and everything else, because I was a second class motor machinist by then. And most of the fellows were just third class. It took us 6 days to get to California, Los Angeles, and they let us off the train, We didn't have a shower or anything for 6 days. Going across the desert, we had the windows opening. They'd blow the tubes on the old steam engines. All that soot would come in, and all you could see was the whites of our eyes when we got off. We were filthy. And they didn't give us any lodging that night. We slept in the park in Los Angeles. The next morning we got back, got on the train, and then they took us down to San Diego, and we went through training there, and they asked who wants to go on a beach party, and I thought that sounded like fun. I didn't know they meant amphibious and salting the beaches. So I got into that, and I was a motor machinist on these small landing craft, and we practiced about 2 weeks making landings on the beach down San Diego. After that, I was shipped up to San Francisco with about 12 other of our group, and we were all in the same amphibious force. And I had 2 weeks on Goat Island waiting to be shipped out for my ship to come in. I pulled a little shore patrol duty, and we left there, and we were about 31, 32 days at sea without seeing land or anything. We ran down due south to stay away from out of subwaters, because we had an old ship, and there was no armament on. We had no escort. It was about 2,000 troops aboard. We got 2 meals a day. We got a cup of coffee, got a hard-boiled egg, and until they ran out, and then we got scrambled eggs, powdered eggs, and a piece of bread, and the water was rationed down, because you weren't allowed to take a shower, just saltwater showers. And in about 30-some days, we landed at New Caledonia, a French possession, and that was just south of Guadalcanal. From when we landed in New Caledonia, it was a rainy season, and there was water every place, everything flooded. And all they had was tents for us, and they said, we want you to put up some Quonset huts. They loaded us on a truck and took us out to a field, and they said they're under the water. There was about 4 inches of water in the field. So we started digging ditches at the other end of the field and draining it, and the field kept filling up. We could feel the metal down there when we poked rods down, but you couldn't pull it up with the suction of the muck and everything. So we went up the ravine to dig another ditch over to divert the water that was coming down from the hills there. And we got up in the ravine and we were digging this ditch over. It started a terrible odor and everything else. And then some French patrol come out there, French policemen, because it was a French colony, and they asked what we were doing there. And we told them we'd come up the ravine to divert the water. He says, well, he says, if you don't get out right away, he says, you're going to have to stay here for 7 years. This is a leopard colony. And under French law, if you wanted in a leopard colony, you have to go into quarantine for 7 years to see if you got it. You stay there. And after 7 years, if you don't have it, they let you go. 2 of our group went farther up the ravine because there was some women up there waving at them. They went up to see what was going on. They got caught up there. That's the last we seen of them. I guess they got deterred. But we were under French rule then over there. So after about 2 weeks there, digging ditches and everything, just below a leopard colony, we finally got the steel up, but we never did get the huts up. And I was put aboard a ship called the USS Clymer. And we were not ship's company at that time. We were like just troops, and we went up with 2 other ships, the American Legion, and the other ship, we never knew the name of it. It was the 3 ships, the group, we went up through the slot to Guadalcanal, and that night we had an air raid, and there was a big explosion off our port side, and it was one of the next morning we found out it was one of the troop ships that was in our group of 3, and they were sunk. We never seen or heard of them again. The next morning we hit the beaches at Guadalcanal, and we were told the island's pretty well secured. Well, we had a 90-some plane ready to come over. We didn't have any planes in the air, and straight to the beach and everything while we landed there. But we got everybody ashore. And the American Legion was a World War I troop ship that got hit. And to save it from going down, they beached it, so all the troops could get off. We were the only ship to get out of there.
Now, what kind of ships were these?
These were what they call APAs, amphibious transports, assault.
Mm-hmm.
And this ship was taken from the African planet. It was a run that used to go from New York to Casablanca, so it was a more McCormick line. And it was commissioned about 1940, 41, I believe. And when the war came, the Navy took it over. It's built in Mississippi.
Now, the landing craft you had were the old Higgins boats without the ramps, or did you have?
We had the ramps in the front.
You had the ramps.
And it was there was about 18 aboard, and then we had two big ones that was twin screw diesels, and that could take a small tank. And we'd have 18 boats on deck and in Welland Davids hanging on the side. That was our duty to man those boats. After Guadalcanal, we made a lot of runs around there, ferrying. We'd run down to New Zealand to take wounded back. Then we came back up Guadalcanal. And then they decided they were going to hop to the next island. And my dates are kind of hazy here, but I got some dates written down, or I could just skip them, I don't know.
If you don't have specific dates, that's fine. It's more of where you were and personal experiences.
Okay. When we got down to Guadalcanal, we were ferrying some troops in there. I ran across a high school buddy who lived right in my block in high school, and grammar school and everything. Graduated from grammar school the same year he did, the same school, St. Brennan's over the south side of Chicago. And his name was Bernie Harlin. Yeah, Bernie was with the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, and he enlisted, and left Chicago, went out to Camp Pendleton, had his 30 days or so in Marine boot camp. Never got a leave, never got a dress uniform, shipped him right over the canal. He got, 2 months after, a month after he was in battle. He had lost a lot of weight aboard ship, and he didn't look too good. So I snuck him in the showers at night, in the ship showers. The troops that we ferried that was off limits to him, but I got him in there at night, so he'd get a shower. And I set him up with some saltwater soap when he'd go ashore. And I'd go down and get a lot of stuff out of the galley. And we had, the Navy, they called it a D-dunk bag. And that was a bag of goodies, sweets and things that you could lay your hands on, can of peaches, whatnot. And I filled the bag up and gave it to him. So we went ashore at Bogainville. We were in the first wave. And my buddy Clure was in the boat next to me. And we made the first wave and got all our loads off on the beach. We come back to the ship, we get another load, and by then they were loading these war dogs in. Guadalcanal, they found out the Japanese, right at where the beach ends, the sand ends and the tree line starts, the big palm trees there, they tie themselves up in the palm trees with these sniper rifles. And anybody that looked important on the beach, you'd get knocked off and shoot you. I learned pretty soon that I wouldn't run around with a toolbox, because anything that got stranded on the beach, we had to go and get running again and get off the beach to clear it. Because we traveled with the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, and they didn't have any mechanics or anything with them. They were all fighters. So I used to carry, by that time I was issued a Marine uniform, so I looked just like the rest of the Marines. And I used to carry all my tools in an ammunition can, so I looked like I was just a runner for ammunition. Not too important or anything, so I wouldn't get sniped at. But we had these Doberman pinchers, and we brought them into Bogainville, about the second or third wave. And we lowered them over the side and put them in a sling light, lowered them in, and the handlers would get them up on the beach and turn them loose. And they'd run up and try to jump up the trees, and we knew there was a Jap up there in the trees. And so the Marines would go in with their BARs, the Browning automatic rifles, and spray the tree, knock down all the foliage off the top of it. There'd be a fella hanging up there dead after they sprayed the tree, and he was a sniper. They cleared off all the snipers off the beach that way. On our second and third trip back, it was about lunchtime, I ran up the landing net on the side of the ship, and this is our ship here. Got a picture of it there.
If you just hold it in front of you.
Yeah. It shows the George Clymer APA-27. One of our landing craft come out alongside, and just aft of it is one of these Doberman pinchers being lowered over the side.
Okay, could you point to it where?
Yeah, it's just about, let's see, just about there where my little finger is. And they were lifesavers, those Doberman pinchers. Well, I ran up that landing net, that's how we got on and off the ship, running up that net. And to get lunch, we'd get a brown paper bag, and then I'd come back and get in the boat, and away we'd go again, going back and forth to the beach. McClure, my buddy that went through training camp and everything, he was a kid from Iowa, about 18 or 19. He was in the boat, and one of the boats that came up alongside, and I yelled down to him, I said, hey, do you want me to go get you lunch? I'm going down the galley, you don't have to climb the rope. And the guys just waved me off like that. And I said, what's wrong with them? They wouldn't talk to me, they were in the boat. And I'm looking down, you know, it's about 3 or 4 stories down the side. It was a tall ship. And it looked like he had some trouble in the bilges. He was kneeling there, and he had his head down in the bilge. And the guys, I found out later that when I looked there, the ship bounced up against the side of the big ship. The boat bounced up the side of the ship, that he fell over. The top of his head was still in the helmet. He got a direct mortar hit right in the boat. So we lost about, throughout all those campaigns, we lost about 50–75% of our boatmen that way, by these mortar attacks. These Japanese had these knee mortars. They were deadly with them. They'd run up and down the beach, and this little saddle they put on their knee. They were only about 1 foot or 2 foot high, and they'd drop that mortar in there. And once they got one in the water, they knew they could aim it, and they would correct for it. The next one would be dropped right in your boat. So that night, after McClure got hit and everything, we lost a lot of men. I thought, I'm not going to be around here for too many of these excursions. So I happened to be walking down the gangway in the ship, and I seen a notice on the bulletin board. It says electrician wanted for ship's company. That would be assigned to the ship, and I wouldn't have to go ashore at these beach parties anymore. So I thought, gee, that'd be a good deal. So I applied, and they were so desperate they took me, because even the chief, which chiefs usually don't stand watch in the Navy, they're privileged. The chief was even standing watch, and it was 12 on and 4 off, 12 on and 4 off. That was the watch. And there were short electricians aboard the ship. So I went down. The yeoman brought me down. He says, we got a fellow here that says he's an electrician. And I had enough technical experience. And in high school and everything, I was always fooling around mechanical things. And he didn't even ask me if I was an electrician. And he said, good, everything's in that book. There's 65 motors down here. He says, I'll tell you how to inspect them and everything. There's a log. And he says, I'll see you in 12 hours. And he walked off. oh, one more thing, he says, if we go on general quarters, he says, there's 2x4s here, and they're numbered, they go into these circuit breakers, you hammer them in, because when you get a near hit, the concussion drops those breakers out, and then we got no power. So he says, every time General Motors sounds, you hammer the 2x4s in. So he left, and I got to stand watch down in the engine room, 4 decks below the water line. I was on the George Clymer maybe a year and a half. And from there, Bogainville, there was Espiritu Santos, there was the Marshalls, there was Kwajalein and Eniwetok. We went over to New Guinea, all through New Guinea. We went to Guam. Guam was heavily fortified, and they really wanted to, was stretching quite a bit to go out that far, but we really wanted to get into Guam because Guam was the first piece of U.S. territory, U.S. land that the Japanese actually got into and got control of. That was like our mainland, Guam, because it was U.S. possession before the war. So we went to Guam. I don't know how many days or weeks we bombarded that. We pulled in close to the beach. And for days these shells would come loping in through our rigging, landing on the beach. And the battle wagons were out there about 12, 15 miles, throwing these big 12 and 16-inch shells in. And when we went to hit Guam, land on the beach, there was Bernie Harlin again. I seen Bernie. And I got him showered, cleaned up. And Bernie went ashore. I think he was with the 2nd Marine Raider Division at that time. And Guam was quite a battle there. They had all these women interned in Guam, the Japanese did, to service their troops. So we got word that we were one of the only troop ships still in there because the hospital ships couldn't get in, the fighting was so heavy. So they said we'd have to be the hospital ship and take the casualties off. Well, all day long we hauled guys down to the first aid, and the decks were slippery with blood. And at night we'd get 20-gallon garbage cans, carry them up to the main deck, because there was arms and legs and everything, amputations in it there, to dump over the side. That's how we got rid of it. And the sharks aren't bad, they're no problem, but it's the barracuda. And that's why it's dangerous. We used to have to go in and get the boats where they were hung up on a reef, or if they break the shaft or something, we want to salvage those boats and bring them back for parts and things. And a lot of times we'd have to go in the water. And we learned to wear, well, it was a Navy reg. After the Lexington went down, they abandoned ship, and the rule was that you wear white socks at that time in the Navy. Well, the white socks attracted the barracuda. They tore their feet to shreds. So the Navy passed a rig then, it was black socks. So we always wore black socks then. So when we went in to salvage these boats, we'd have something black or something. You wouldn't have the white soles of your feet, because the barracuda would slash it. But if you get in where the surf was heavy, and you get roughed up in the surf and the coral was very deadly, because once you get scraped on the coral, you get an infection that don't heal. But we were pretty lucky, because the most part we'd always land on the windward side, and that water would be pretty clear. But if you get a landing on the leeward side where there was no current, the water would go around the island, and the lagoons would be stagnant back there. And we were in there one time. We had to go in and salvage some boats. We had to swim to them. And I worked in the surf all day and was tired. I got back to the ship that night, and I just went to sleep, my bunk, And I forgot to go to first aids because they put drops on in your ears. Because the South Pacific, although it sounds great, it's not a good environment down there. Everything grows in the water. And you get a fungus growth on your eardrum. And the way they cure that is they scrape the eardrum. But they don't give you anything for it. But they told me I wouldn't feel a thing. He was right. The first scrape across the eardrum, you pass out just like that. So you get your eardrum scraped. So you learn to put the eardrops in because in the surf like that, working the surf in the boats, getting them off the rocks. But I was on the George Clymer and I got to be second class. And then I got to be first class electrician. We made the landing at Luzon for the Philippines. After about 2 weeks, MacArthur came in. We seen that. Was there on the beach. We ran all around the Philippines. Went down to the southernmost island.
Can I go back a minute? You were in, when MacArthur came into shore, you were there?
Yeah.
Did he come on twice or once?
I don't know how many times we rehearsed, but I know they were in about a foot of water and they were raking the sand underneath the water. And they would be sure there was no potholes that he was going to step into. But, you know, see, Halsey can control the water out there, but MacArthur, there was an imaginary line drawn up on the western end, and he had control of the air power. And it ran all the way up to the Philippines because he wanted to control Manila. Because there was a lot of financial holdings, he had personal holdings in Manila. So he, when he left there, he took all the planes with him to protect Australia. Because Darwin was being bombed and everything else, and that was the next stepping stone. See, the Japs, the whole war was fought over Japanese getting the oil out of the Burma fields. And Pearl Harbor was just going to be their western flank, China their eastern flank, and just the shore of Australia was their southern flank. So they got down pretty close. They got the tip of the Philippines, they got to Borneo down there, they got all the way down there. We thought New Zealand was safer, but it was farther south than Australia, but we used to run down to New Zealand all the time. When we got there, I never seen so many cameramen since I was out there, and all the news outlets and everything were set up on the beach. You know, the word got out that MacArthur was coming in, and we knew there was a big celebration and everything. And then he got his corncob pipe out and everything else, and he waded ashore and he got wet almost up to his knees. It was a big joke. We laughed about it for a week. Poor ship. Could I get the washroom a second?
Sure.
Let's see. Invasion of Marianas, Kwajalein into Saipan. Arrived in Eniwetok. Oh, and it was 1944, July. We left for Guam invasion. July the 21st, we hit the beaches of Guam after 13 days of bombing. Then August the 20th, we left Guam, and we were designated to take all the wounded back to Pearl Harbor. And they told us there was 100 women coming aboard. Well, no one's seen a woman in over a year. So there's quite a bit of excitement. Showers got busy, everybody started shaving and getting cleaned up. And when the women come ashore, that was the biggest disappointment I ever seen. They forgot to tell us they were all pregnant. And you couldn't tell what they were so dirty. Matted hair and barefooted and scurvy and moss growing in their head and everything else.
Now these were Japanese women or?
Some were Asian. There was a few most of them looked like half-breeds. You couldn't tell what they were. They were so dirty. And we lost all interest after they came aboard. And they put them in segregated quarters, got them cleaned up, I guess, and everything. And they took them off at Pearl Harbor. We went back to Pearl. It's kind of hard to remember the exact dates. Like I would always say, can't remember what I had for supper last week, but this is over 60 years ago. And so we went to Guadalcanal on the 11th of February, and we trained for over a month for the invasion of Okinawa. So we departed Leyte in the Carolinas, that's in the atolls out there, and in a convoy, 27th of March. So we unloaded troops there and departed April the 5th. We went from Saipan to Pearl Harbor. We arrived in San Francisco on May the 9th, 1945. We had finished the invasion of Eniwetok, Marianas, all the admiralties in the Philippines, and we had to go back to Pearl Harbor. It doesn't say in the ship's logs. While we were regrouping for the run back to Pearl, we went into Eniwetok. Eniwetok in the Kwajaleins is an atoll, and it's just a strip of sand about 2 feet above sea level. And it's a big lagoon in there. It's about 65 miles across. It was real. There was only one entrance. So they put the submarine nets across the entrance so we could steam in there and regroup and then leave from there, and then resort and reassign whatever ships were short, certain tradesmen or certain skills. And the LSTs were in there. They were these large landing craft, but they didn't have any means of making fresh water. So the big ship we were on, we had a desalter on there. We would make our fresh water, and then we would, when we'd get enough water, we'd run up the water ball. The LSTs would come steaming towards us, mad dash whoever had the water. So one morning, Captain run up the water ball, and right off our stern was an LST and another one off our starboard beam, and they both started for us. Well, they were seeing who was going to be first. So the fellow off our beam, he was trying to cut the other fellow off, but he didn't turn fast enough. Those LSTs don't turn too fast, you know. It takes about 6 city blocks to get him to go to 45. And he started making the turn, and he didn't make the turn. He come right in and hit us amidships, and he poked a hole that you put a 40-foot trailer in, right at our water line. And it was right in the mess hall. Took out the whole mess hall. We had beautiful scenery all the way back to Pearl because it was open view of the ocean. It's like a bay window. So when we got back to Pearl, they welded a few plates on it, but it wasn't true. We had to go back to San Francisco for complete repairs. When I got back to San Francisco, the ship was out there so long, they figured it had to stay a little longer, I guess, for repairs. So they needed first-class electricians. And so I guess it was May the 9th or so, March the 9th, that we got to San Francisco. May the 9th in 1945. So I left George Clymer after going aboard there in 43. And I went over to the Alameda Navy Yard. They gave me a transportation ship to ride the buses and the A train and the Oakland Bay Bridge and everything. I got over there into Oakland, and they had a yard there. They just started building a new type of attack transport. It looked like a destroyer with rake stacks on it. They slanted back, and the main deck was about 4 feet above the waterline, real fast, twin screw, and it was diesel electric. And so they had these two big diesel engines down there that ran electric generators, and they had the electric motors running the props. And there was two chief electricians aboard and a whole crew of electricians, a big complement. And it was all electric drive ship. And we went, that ship was the USS Gasconade. I went down and got on the ship, and they said they were waiting for me because they were short of a first-class electrician. Well, I got aboard ship. They had a big crew, electrical crew on it. There must have been 30 or so electricians aboard that thing. But in talking to the chief, after a day or so, we went out for a shakedown cruise with the new ship outside of San Francisco, down in Catalina, and run around there. And they got some big swells. That's where the Pacific Shelf comes up, so you get some big swells. And we found out that the chief and I were the only ones that had any sea duty. Well, we know what that meant. All the crew got sick. So we wound up standing most of the watches. We were 12 on and 4 off all the way for the first month until they got their sea legs and got over their sickness. So we went there and went to Pearl Harbor, Eniwetok in the Marshall Islands, Leyte, Leyte, back to San Francisco, back to Eniwetok, Philippines, and then on August the 2nd, in Leyte Gulf, we got a word about a little after 9 o'clock that night that the Japanese were going to surrender. And we were getting together practicing for the invasion of Japan. And that wasn't a good feeling because we knew what we were going to run up against. And there was a lot of stories going around and everything. So we didn't know what was going to happen. So August the 22nd we went to Manila. And then we left there the 25th. And we went to Suzan. And then on September the 2nd, we arrived at Yokohama in Tokyo Bay. And they were going to sign the surrender. And they didn't know if Japan, how friendly they were going to be if we went ashore. So I don't know how I was chosen, but they got a hold of me and 2 Marines in the 2nd Raider Battalion. They said, go ashore, and no one's been ashore yet. You go ashore, and they gave me an address, and description in the Navy Yard. Said, pick up this merchant marine captain, Japanese, and he's going to show us the way in. He's a pilot for the Yokohama harbor. The whole harbor was supposedly mined. And then we can get the minesweepers and clean it out, because I think the Missouri was going to come in, and that's where they're going to sign the peace treaty. So I said, do I get to pick these 2 Marines that are going to go with me? Guys, who do you want? Some guys I know from the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion. And he says, well, most of those fellows are pretty far out. He says, your job is going to be to keep them from killing the pilot, because every time they see Japanese, they shoot first. Mm-hmm. So they said, never mind about the people on shore. We think they're going to be pretty well. Stay clear of you. Mm-hmm. Everybody's afraid what's going to happen. And he says, but don't let any harm come to that captain. He said, why don't you tell that to the Marines? They said, no, you're in charge. You outrank them. You go ashore with them. So they didn't pick an officer for that. I was the acting chief by that time. So I took these 2 Marines in and we went in and I followed the directions. We went up the street and it was quiet. We didn't see a person. All the shutters were closed and the houses and everything. And we found nobody had been ashore yet. we had to go ashore to get the pilot to bring the ships in. So I went up there and showed the papers, and there was a guy sitting in a little hut up there, Navy Yard. He gave me the hi, customary yes, and so I told him to come on, and he was like a navy blue jacket with a high collar on it, just buttons on it, very plain, and with a cap, navy cap on. And he came out, and I was supposed to walk in front, but I wanted to walk behind. I told him to walk in front so I could watch the Marines. And I told the Marines, I want you to keep those on safety. I said, I don't want you to be aiming at him or anything else. Because I was afraid they get spaced out or something. You never know what they were going to do. And Eleanor Roosevelt made the comment when she was down at Guadalcanal. Just go backtracking a minute. Down at Guadalcanal, when we first got there, they used to chop up the prisoners and hang their body parts on the trail to scare you. Well, the Marines were down there, and they'd fight fire with wood fire, so they would behead the prisoners, and then use them as fender guides. They'd tack the broomsticks on the edge of the jeeps and stick the head on the broomstick. So when Eleanor Roosevelt come down after the island was secured and visit them, they were trying to shield her from a lot of this stuff. Some of these guys got in a jeep and rode down the road, and she seen them going by with those heads using as fender guides. And she went back, and when she got back to the States, she says, those boys out there being dehumanized, and she's, when they come back, we got to get them into some sort of rehabilitation for about 3 months. All the fellows said, we were out there that long. Now we got to go be locked up for another 3 months after we get back. So, but we didn't know what these fellows were going to do, these Marines. So we get down, we get in this little landing boat, and it's a mail boat, and go back out to the ships. And this Japanese Marine captain turns to me in perfect English. He says, how's San Francisco doing these days? And I was stunned. And I said, you speak English? He says, oh yes, I was educated at UCLA. So we got into quite a conversation. And that was his job during the war. He was master of the ships at the harbor down there in Yokohama. And talked to him, brought him out to the ship, and that was the pilot that brought the ships in, and then we got the minesweepers and swept it. And then I guess the Missouri came in, and a lot of us lesser ships, we formed like a circle around them so they couldn't launch a torpedo or anything at the battle wagon, and they'd get us instead. So we protected that. So we could see this, I don't know how many yards off we could see it real plain, but we could see the signing on the deck there, the signing of the peace treaty. So after that, fellas started getting discharged. Well, the way they discharged you, and we had men, I was about 21 at the time. I spent 3 years in service. I had men in their middle, late 40s underneath me, and they all had 3 and 4 kids at home. A lot of them were drafted. They got discharged because they had more points. It was on a point system. You got so many points for every dependent. You got so many points for being married. You got so many points for your age. And all these points added up. Well, being married and a lot of dependents, that meant the government had to pay you a lot. So they got discharged first. So our crew got stripped. We lost the 2 chiefs off the USS Gasconade. We got put on this magic carpet run, ferrying troops back and forth across the Pacific. I had one picture here where we got caught in a typhoon off of
Why don't you hold that up and
off of
where you
Okinawa.
focus on that?
And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a wave coming right over the bow out of the main deck. And all you can see is the boom sticking up out of the water. The whole deck is awash.
Okay.
Our sister ship got the 1/4-inch deck plates rolled up like a sheet of toilet paper, pushed up against the forward bulkhead, and the wave come down in the main engine room, and a giant flash, and blew out the whole ship. They towed it back to the States for complete overhaul. Winds were, they recorded them at over 100 miles an hour, that typhoon. It blew 8-foot landing boats right off the deck. We had them secured with 3/8 cable, half-inch cable on the deck, but it just snapped that, blew them right off. So there was a lot of storms and everything, but sometimes it would take us 13 days to make the trip across, and if it was stormy weather, it could take 20-some days. But we ran back and forth, and going through Japan, and a lot of times we'd take the Great Circle route coming back, and we'd get into Seattle, Portland, Oregon. And we'd go from Okinawa, Japan, Leyte, and ferrying troops back to the States. So I started doing that in September '44, and then all of September and October, and then November. And I finally got back to the States, and I was acting chief. There was no chief support ship, and at that time the fellows were pretty well trained, and they had their sea legs, and they didn't get seasick anymore. And I had enough points, and I was up for discharge. They gave me some money, and I took a train back to Chicago. I got back to Great Lakes, and being young and naive, not knowing anything, they told me I had an impact wisdom tooth, and they'd pull it for free. Cost me a lot of money if I get out. So I said, fine. So my mustering out pay was, I think, $51 or $52. And then by the time you deducted all the shaving supplies and everything else, I got $20-some. And they pulled my tooth. It was a wisdom tooth, and they had to chisel it out. And in those days, things were kind of crude. And I had 2 black eyes and a swollen jaw, and I couldn't talk. That's how I got busted out. So I got on the train, went to Chicago. When I got in Chicago, I could hardly see, and I couldn't talk. My mouth was bleeding. And I thought, boy, I got to go home, face the folks like this, you know, and all the neighbors coming in, because I can't go like this. I couldn't even talk. Terrible headache. And it was in January in Chicago, cold as hell. My blood was thinned out from being in the Pacific, and it was freezing. So, and down on Madison Street in Chicago Loop, there's flop houses, and they maintain them for the homeless. We called them bums at that time, not homeless, but you would go up, be a second floor in a warehouse or something, they'd have a rope in there, and for 50 cents, you know, you'd throw your arms over the rope, you could hang on the rope all night. You weren't allowed to lay on the floor, it took up too much space. So for 50 cents or a quarter a night, if it was heated, it'd be 50 cents, if it was unheated, it'd be a quarter, you'd be in and out of the cold. But I knew I couldn't do that, but I did have $20, so I got a room, I think it was $1.25, $1.50. There was no hot water or anything, so I stayed there for 2 days, and I'd go out and get a milkshake and bring it back until the swelling went down, I could talk. So then I went home. But my folks had moved during the wartime, and it was a new neighborhood. So I had to find out where by letters I'd find out where they moved to. But you know, when I got home, I figured I was still a kid. I didn't have no transportation. I asked my mother where my bike was. She said, you're 20-some years old now. You can't ride a bike anymore. I gave it away. We were moving. She said, what's in the way? So I came home, and it was the same thing as when I left. The south side of Chicago was kind of a tough neighborhood. We never had I think one time when I was a kid, we had hot water that was electric, but there was no heat. You had to supply your own heat. We had coal stoves, but then we got pretty fancy. In the late 30s, we got a oil burner. And that was right after the Depression. But I survived the war, and I think it was my upbringing in Chicago, because the Chicago neighborhood, we didn't play baseball. We had tournaments every Friday night, even in grammar school. It was fights. So you'd go up the alley, and you'd pick straws, and if you got picked the week before, or previous during that year, you didn't have to fight. But all the kids that didn't fight yet were in the pool, and you get matched up. So you always had plenty of fights. But I was lucky. I'd come out of service, and I had a few stitches or a fight for a can of peaches. That's about all. But I didn't have too much scars left. I did learn a good trade as an electrician. I come back to Chicago. I still had almost 4 years of college. Scholarship to go, but it'd be a 2-year wait to get in. By that time, I didn't think of going back to school. I had put 3 years in service, another 2 years, 5 years. So.
Did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
No. I
How
never got a penny.
How about the 5220 Club? Did you use that?
No. When I got back, my cousin was going for a job as a machinist, so I went with him, and it was a steel mill, and it used to be Alcoa, and they broke up the trust for antitrust reasons, and Reynolds Metal picked the plant up. So I went in there, and he was filling out the thing, machinist. The girl, "Do you want to apply for a job?" I said, "Well, not really. I was thinking of going back to school." She said, "What'd you do in service?" I said, "I was chief electrician, acting chief, permanent first class." She said, "Well, just wait here a second." She got the superintendent over. The superintendent came over and he says, "You were in the Navy?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Know anything about DC?" "Yeah, DC shit, you're an handful or so." He said, "What'd you do?" I said, "Everything. We rewound motors, excite motors." I said, "We undercut commutators, seat the brushes, kept everything running. It was all DC." He said, "We got 60-some motors. This plant was put in mothballs, and it's all DC." He said, "I got 80-some electricians in there, but I got nobody that knows DC." He said, "When could you start to work?" This was on a Thursday or Friday. I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "What do they pay?" He says, "Union electrician. Union wages." But he says, "You'll be the youngest and least seniority in the plant, so you'll have to work every holiday and every weekend. The holidays paid triple time, the weekends paid double time." You know, today, electricians make $29 an hour plus almost that much in benefits. There's an electrician in Chicago that doesn't take home $50,000 a year, less than that. So I worked there for 3 years. And then I moved back into Chicago. And then I got a license for electrical contractor in the city of Chicago. Then I worked around there. I got consulting work, and I got in the plastic business, and one thing led to another, and I did work for Carrier Research, and then Carrier, fellow I was working for in Chicago, with like a consulting engineering. We did what we call turnkey. We'd go out and start a plant up, get the land, build the building, put all the equipment in, and train the people and everything else, and then come back to Chicago. So I came up to Syracuse, because at that time there was no plastic around here. This was plastic manufacturing, and Carrier wanted to put all their window units in plastic. So I came up and I worked with research. They went to the owner of this company and said, "Put a plant in Syracuse," because they had 4 trailer loads a day coming in, finished product from Chicago. The freight was too much. So I came here in the 50s and put a plant up. And I stayed. Raised 2 kids here.
How do you think your time in the service had an effect on your life?
I think, I don't know if I was born under a lucky star or anything, but I was very fortunate. I was able to go into my own business. I acquired a couple other businesses too. And I made out, so I don't have to worry too much now that I'm retired. I was on the board of some companies here in Syracuse. I traveled extensively. I worked as a consultant, traveled all over Europe. And I got to stand on my own 2 feet, gave me responsibility, find out time is short, life is short. Instead of thinking about it and everything, don't sit and ponder too long. Just sit, think about it. And a lot of times you can do your homework and research. But I've kept that thought. And when I retired, I said I'm tired of running around looking at the bottom line, the financial statements. And I went over to Europe for Bristol Myers and their penicillin line. I worked for all the packaging for radioactive isotopes. The government of Canada started up some of their production up north of Ottawa, radioactive material. I was exposed to a lot of different manufacturing. My wife died just before I retired, so I was still working, going strong. I was 69 years old when she died, and what am I doing all this for? So I had a summer home in Sugar Bush for a minute, and an airplane. I had a 40-foot sailboat up on Lake Ontario. I owned it with another fellow. The airplanes I owned myself. During that time, since I got out of service, I learned quite a bit about fighting. It comes naturally because you're Irish. But I was on the U.S. judo team when we represented 5 states of Chicago. And when I went back, I had a nervous condition when I got out of service, high blood pressure and everything. And the doctor told me he couldn't sleep. He says, you got to get fully relaxed. So I went down the line, started wrestling and everything. And then I got in with a bunch of Nisi in Chicago. And for 7 years, I worked out in judo, in tournaments and everything. Went against Cuba and all that. And I went to work and got a company that all the fellows flew, got in a flying club, got my pilot's license. And they had a lot of fun.
If you could hold this up, tell us where and when that was taken. About, you don't have to know.
I believe that was taken around 1943. Not exact date. I come home, my mother insisted I have my picture taken, because she didn't have any pictures of me in uniform. In service, we weren't allowed to carry a camera. We weren't allowed to keep any notes, in case we got captured, so they'd know where we were. But this is the one picture I got when I was in uniform.
All right, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Okay.